Here's your amortization chart at 9% where we are right now. Here's what the bank's offering at 4 or 5%. Look how much money you could save just by doing that. And the reason I do that is because if I get paid off early, my return skyrockets.
Welcome to the Real Estate Investing School podcast. I'm your host, Joe Jensen. Our guest today is Nathan Turner. He is known across the U.S. as the Canadian Note Guy. Having run several businesses, including fix and flip real estate, he discovered mortgage notes in the U.S. in 2009, and since became a leader in the industry in the private investment sector. He's the president of Ernest Inc. and manager of the U.S.-based Ernest Investing LP Note Fund, where he actively manages assets for accredited passive investors. He's also the owner and host of the Diversified Mortgage Expo, which is a leading annual note conference. This conference has a history of being an educational note pitching event where those who want to learn, network, and grow come together. Nathan is passionate about his unique approach to real estate with its multiple exit strategies and win-win situations. He's excited to take the roller coaster out of investing for his passive investors and allow them to just sit back and enjoy the ride. Well, welcome to the show, Nathan.
Hey, pleasure. Thank you.
Glad to have you here. So the notes is interesting. My dad, who's kind of the one who first got me onto real estate, actually got quite a bit into note buying for a while. So I know a little bit about it.
Yeah.
I've owned a couple notes, but it's definitely more niche. It's not, most of the guests we have on here, most of the podcasts you listen to, people don't talk about notes. I would guess half the people listening probably don't even know what we're really talking about when we, as I say that.
Yeah.
The other half know there's a mortgage out there, but they don't really know how do you invest in mortgages. So anyway, welcome to the show, man. Glad to have you here.
Hey, thank you. It's good to be here.
That's cool. So where you're based? You're based up in Canada then, right?
I am just outside of Calgary, Alberta. And so I'm just, if you know where Banff is, if you've ever heard of it, we're about a little over an hour away from that.
Okay, awesome. Beautiful area from what I've seen online. I need
gorgeous. We love it. Yeah.
Get up to Banff. It looks on my bucket list for sure.
Yeah.
So how did you get started in all this then? It sounds like you didn't start with notes, but that's where you've ended up. What's kind of the origin story of Nathan Turner?
Oh man, I came from a real estate background, like a lot of people that get into notes. I was doing fix and flip up in Canada, and it was a fun time. I was 05, 06 when everything was going really well. I think everybody was flipping houses back then, just because it was easy and markets were going up and it just looked really good. So I did the same thing. I was doing some flipping, and as the market turned, I got stuck with one property. And I ended up renting it out because I figured that's what you're supposed to do, right? And so I rented it out. I figured out pretty quick. I liked the monthly income, but there was very little else that I liked about being a landlord. I didn't see the appeal. I wasn't sure why people talked about this and had classes and all these other things. I was like, man, this is not where it's at. There's a lot of work. And I was on the other side of the country from it, so that made it even more difficult. But so that was kind of my intro to real estate. And then it was a couple of years later, a friend of mine had moved down to California. He met up with some investors who had bought a portfolio of properties, mostly centered in the Midwest. And they had bought this portfolio in April 2007. So if you think back in time, like that was like the very top of the market, right? Yeah. When everything was right at its height. So as a result, in hindsight, they way overpaid for this portfolio. It was supposed to be just a deal where they bought it and sold it back out to another company, but that deal went sideways. By the fall of 2008, they were like, oh, shoot, what do we do? And that's where I came in, me and my old partner, and they said, we've got all these properties. We don't know what to do with them. We don't even know what we have. You guys make some lemonade out of these lemons and figure it out. So that was kind of our purview. Like our mandate was just go and just do something with these properties with no operating budget, just a power of attorney. So it ended up, we figured out that selling them on terms and creating notes was really the best approach to what we had. So that was my introduction. I'd never heard of notes before. We kind of actually thought we'd invented seller financing. And that's how we got started. And then just the more I got into it, the more I met people and went to conferences, and it just became a thing. And I started buying up non-performing and getting them reperforming if we could. And it just took off from there. It's been great.
That's awesome. So this firm that bought a big bundle, how many are we talking? 12, 100? Like how big was this bundle?
60.
So 60 units, they buy 60 units, plan on just moving it, selling it to this other company, goes sideways, the market shifts. They're stuck with 60 units that they don't even know much about. And they bring you and your partner and say, hey, figure out how to make money with this so we don't lose more than we have to.
Right.
They're probably not even really looking to make money, just save their butts a little bit.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
you guys figure out, hey, if we piecemeal these apart, separate the package, sell each one as a seller finance deal to someone that may not be able to buy a home traditionally, then you could actually charge a premium, or at least premium to the market at that time, which was way below what they bought them for. Yeah. But you're able to seller finance them, create your own terms, and become the bank. You gave them a mortgage, for signing the deal. And you're like, how did your investors, the guys that gave you the deal, were they pretty stoked on this, or were they kind of hesitant at first, or how'd that go down?
Well, I think they realized like these were our houses not in good shape. They were, bottom market to begin with. So they knew that they had a bunch of just junk that was going to be very difficult to resell in the first place. So what we presented them with was, this is the way that is going to happen. Like, to put it just up on the market, we're talking maybe $10,000 a door at that time. So we were going in and saying, we'll sell them for $20,000 a door on monthly payments. And then it was in the process of doing my research and like, okay, and then how do we cash out of these things? That's when I kind of stumbled into this note world, because I ran into a guy out of Texas talking about buying what we were creating. I'm like, oh, that's it. This is the ticket. So I went down, took his class, and pitched him my notes. And I ended up selling him to somebody else, but somebody that I'd met through connections that I'd made at this note conference. And again, it just kind of opened up that whole world that this existed, that people were buying and selling notes. And I was like, this is awesome. This is cool. And one of the kind of the light bulb moment for me was, okay, so we got somebody living in the house. They're making monthly payments. They're the ones who are taking care of the property. So me, with my headaches that I was dealing with as a landlord, almost all go away. Not to say there's no work, not to say there's no headaches involved, but I don't have to pay for the roof when it needs fixing. I don't have to replace the toilet. I don't have to pay property taxes. None of those things are my responsibility as the note holder. So that for me was a big ding moment. I'm like, man, this is really where it's at, because I like that monthly income. I just didn't like having to take care of the property.
It's funny, as we're talking, I'm thinking of a property. I'm literally just got escrow note today that I'm selling, because it was just a huge headache. I have never even rented out. I traded a mobile home for this little house, and then I was trying to get it ready to rent, but it's just been just a money pit headache. And I'm like, I'm just going to get out of this. And I sold it. And I'm sitting here going, dang it. Like, I'm literally closing this week. I'm like, I should be seller financing this. I even had people asking originally if I would. And I'm like, no, I don't do that. Like, I long hold, I want to hold the asset.
Yeah.
But then last minute I was like, okay, just sell the thing. And I was just becoming such a headache. But I'm like, I should be seller financing this, because then I don't have to do any of the repairs. I don't have to deal with any of it. I could be making cash flow, long hold. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I want to ask, do you have a metric where you're going? I'm trying to make myself feel better here. But do you have a metric where you go, hey, if I could make this much off of just straight up selling it, I'd rather just have the cash today, because that's valuable, versus I'll take payments. Like, how do you decide to just sell it? Because maybe you said, okay, well, we could sell it for 10,000, even though they're worth 20 or whatever, they weren't expensive. But is 10,000 a day worth more than those payments? Or how do you decide which way to roll with that?
That's a great question, because the situation is different every time. Like, for example, let's say I've got, a property, maybe I have an investor on this one, and the investor's like, look, let's just get out of it. I just want my money back. I don't want to deal with anything long-term. Let's just get the money out and go. Well, in that case, I'm probably going to sell it for a little bit less, just because that's the preference. That's kind of the direction we want to be going.
Yeah.
But again, my preference, I would rather sell it on terms and create a note and then just start collecting on those payments. Over the long term, you think on your own mortgage, for easy numbers, let's say your mortgage is $100,000 at today's rate, 6.5%, 7%. Over the life of that loan, 30 years later, you're paying well over $200,000 for the use of that property, for the
Mm-hmm.
interest on that loan. So it's worth a lot more when you're hanging on to it long term because you've got that interest rate built in there.
Yeah. Do you have a set rule for your personal deals, or because obviously if you're working with an investor, you just kind of do what they want and make them
Yeah.
happy. If it was your money and your deal, and again, it obviously depends on your goals at the time, I guess. But do you have any numbers you were like, yeah, if it's this, I'd sell it, but if I'm making this, I'd rather no. Like,
Not really, no hard and fast rule.
cool.
Sometimes it's like, you know what, this is a headache property. I just don't want to deal with it. Let's just be done. There's value in that. Like sometimes the dollars and cents is not the bottom line. Sometimes it's like, this property has just been an absolute nightmare. Let's just sell it and be done and move on to the next thing. Whereas other times it's like, you know what, there's long-term potential here. We can sell it and carry this note. That'd be great. So there's no hard and fast. It's very much a feel it out.
Yeah, so just for clarification, when we're talking about notes for people, we're talking about like a mortgage note. Basically, it's that's what whenever you have a mortgage, the bank has the note on the property. We're talking about seller financing, so you have the note on the property. Now,
Right.
there's two ways to do it, though. There's the actual official seller financing where you are in the place of the bank and the bank does not own the home, right? Like the
Right.
title's in my name, I pay a mortgage, but the home's mine. And you can do that as a seller finance, but you can also do more of like a lease option where technically it is mine until they've fully paid off the note. And
Yeah.
then they get the title in their name, which gives me a lot more control. You want to speak to that and why you do it one way, why you do it another way, and how you personally do it?
Yeah, that's a great point, and interesting talking to somebody that's a little more experienced, because most people don't know that.
Yeah.
We kind of, the umbrella term is notes, but within that you've got mortgages, you've got deeds of trust, which are different, and then you've got contracts for deed
Yeah.
that includes land contracts and includes agreements for deed. Kind of different states call it different things is really what it boils down to. But yeah, it really makes a difference on which one. So with a mortgage or a deed of trust, I'm going to lump those two together just because it's easier. With those, what it really means is the borrower, the person living in the house, they're the one on title.
Yeah.
So they own the property. I'm just the lender in that case.
Yep.
With that contract for deed situation, I actually remain on title the whole time. So I've agreed to have this person buying this property on terms, meaning they're making whatever it is, $1,000 a month payment. Part of that is going to be principal, part of that is going to be interest. And same with a regular mortgage, it's an amortization chart. So at the beginning, you're paying mostly interest, and then over time, you're paying less interest and more principal. And that's just the nature of the amortization. That's just how it works. But like you say, the advantage, I think, is if you can stay on title, that can be an advantage. It can be a disadvantage. It depends on how you look at it and what your goals are. I like those kind of contracts because I am on title. So if there's a case where the person defaults and they're not making payment, it's much easier for me to turn that back around and get possession of the property again, so I can turn it back out and do something else with it.
Yeah. So
Now,
those listening, what he's saying is if they don't
yeah,
make their payments, he doesn't have to foreclose, right? Like
right,
you're not going to have to go through the whole foreclosure process because they never owned the property. It's still
right,
in your name. You can basically just evict them and move on with your life, and you still own the property and turn around and sell it.
yeah,
And what's cool with these is like, let's say it was a more beat up property. Somebody comes in, they're buying it. They
mm-hmm.
don't own it yet. They're buying it with so they spend 5 years fixing it up, getting it better, and then they default. You
Mm-hmm.
give them a chance. We're not crooks. You give them a chance to catch up. You give them a chance, whatever. You're not like stepping in the moment they're 1 minute late or anything like that. But let's say they truly are not going to make the payments. You evict them. Your home's probably in better shape now than when you first leased it out, because these aren't
Right.
A-class beautiful homes that a tenant's going to come in and trash. Typically when you do these, like say they're already beat up and that you'd have a hard time selling them. That's why you do the lease. And
Yeah.
then you end up back with the property in better shape than before, and you can start the whole process over again. I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but I've seen that happen.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, we've definitely had that. And as much as I actually don't want the property back. So if there is
For
a
sure.
default, I am working with them and saying, look, what else can we do? If $1,000 a month is not good, could you do 800? And then we'll adjust. If that means we need to raise the interest rate by half a point, that means we got to stretch out. Maybe it was a 20-year loan initially. Now we've stretched out to 30 years, something like that to help make that monthly payment manageable. I'm more than willing to do that because I don't actually want the house. It is so much easier just dealing with the paper. So I would rather have that be the outcome.
That's cool. So those are some of the pros of doing a con. See, in Utah we don't have contract for deed, so I don't know what we would call it here. I just call it a lease option. It's like you're leasing it with the option to buy, and you legally can be the first to buy. And here's the time frame.
Yeah.
But when they don't actually put the title in their name yet, where you're not just the bank, but you're financing, but you still own it, you have that control, like you said, where you don't have to foreclose. The home's in your name. What are there other pros besides that, and what are some of the cons?
That's the biggest one, really, is just getting that back. Some of the cons is it kind of depends on the state. So, for example, like a state like Florida, for example, if you can go ahead and sell a property on a land contract or contract for deed or whatever you want to call it, the reality is if there's a default and you end up going to foreclosure, it is going to be a full foreclosure. The court is going to treat it as if it was a mortgage. So there's no advantage in that.
Oh,
interesting. In that scenario where it's like, because you already own the property, you don't have to do the full foreclosure. In Florida, for example, there's a few states like that. Florida, Texas is another. Anywhere in the Northeast, basically New York, New Jersey, any of those places, they all treat it the same way. So it's a state by state law, and you have to make sure you're aware of how that works for that state. In Utah, I'm not sure. I don't know that I've ever bought any.
Well, we don't have contracts for deeds, so if you did, you're not filing anything like that. You're just signing a rental agreement. At least this is the way I've done it. Again, like, I know what I know and I don't know what I don't, but you virtually just sign a rental agreement, and they have a lease option note that you sign as well, but you're not filing that at the county. They don't have any ownership. There's no contract for deed that I know exists the way we do it. But in those other states, I guess, what states do you mostly work in?
A lot of Texas. It kind of tends to be sort of the eastern half of the country. So like Michigan and down to Texas and everything else in between. That's mostly. So Texas,
could you not just do like a lease option agreement and not actually do a full on contract for deed, so you don't have to deal with that kind of foreclosure?
I think you could, but in Texas, the interesting thing is foreclosure in Texas is very fast. In theory, you could get one done in 2 months. I've never been able to do that fast. The fastest I've ever had one done is 4, but still, like that's pretty fast. So in Texas, for example, there's actually no advantage either way to doing that contract for deed. And actually the courts don't like them, so you probably get hung up. So Texas is a deed of trust state, so you just write it as a deed of trust to start with.
Interesting. Okay. So what are the downsides then? That's the upside of keeping it in your name and then taking payments until it's paid off before it goes in their name, whatever we call that. And what are the downsides of doing it that way, as opposed to doing like what a traditional bank does, where the home's in the person's name and they just give them, the loan?
Well, there's a couple of downsides. So one, you are on title. So if there's any kind of title issues, that actually comes back to you because you own the property. So there's potential title issues, which may or may not be there. So that's a potential downside. The other one really is property taxes. And the property taxes in this case, because you are on title, they are in your name. So with a mortgage, the taxes, I'm not directly responsible. Whoever's living in the house, they're the one on title, so they are directly responsible. If they default, it can become my problem because they come before me as the first lien holder. So it can indirectly affect me, but I'm not directly responsible for that. And to me, that's an important enough distinction that I'm not the one actually in charge.
Go into that though. So if you own the note and the property's in your name, then it is in your name. You said there's somebody else that it's in their name. That lost me.
Right. So if it's a mortgage situation, then the person living in the home, they're the one on title. Taxes are their deal.
Right. If you're just if you literally just own the note, but the title's not in your name.
Right.
But
But
if
if
the
it's a
title is
lease
in your
option,
name, it's a downside because you kind of have some liability there. The
yeah,
taxes are in your name,
yeah,
maybe potential litigation because you own the property.
yeah,
I gotcha.
potentially. And so,
Mhm.
potential. So, how much of a risk is that? Probably not very high, quite honestly, but it's there. And so it's just something to be aware of, if nothing else.
Yeah, it's funny. So I just experienced this with a vehicle. I was like, cool, I'm gonna lease option my vehicle out. Like it wasn't worth very much. But I was like,
Yeah,
dude, if I do a rent to own, like some people give me way more over time. So I was
right.
like, cool, I'm gonna do it, And so I did it, wrote up the contract, we put the vehicle in their name so they could go register it, insure it, and everything like that. I didn't want it in my name.
Yeah,
And so I was straight up just the note holder. I was the bank, the
yeah,
lender
perfect.
on it. He made one payment and then disappeared and has never made another payment. And I'm like, oh crap. And then, so I called the cops. I'm like, dude, someone stole my car, blah, blah, blah. They're like, cool, we'll help you out. And they're like, no, it's in his name. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, yeah, we switched the title to his name.
Shoot.
I didn't do a lease option. I didn't do the option to buy
Yeah,
down the road. I sold it to him.
yeah. So if you can find them, maybe you could get something done, but yeah,
Yeah, so I don't know. They're like, you're gonna have to go file a civil case,
yeah,
and like file like compound, like yeah, and it was just this whole mess. I'm like, I don't even know if it's worth it. I mean, the car's worth like 2 grand or something. You know what I mean?
yeah,
So I'm like, I don't know if
yeah,
any of this was worth it. And I did get 1,000 up front and then one payment, so I almost got what it was worth off the
right.
bat, but it was just kind of a eye opening to me. I mean, houses are harder to run away with, which is why I like
Right.
houses, and they go up in value. But it was just kind of like, oh, you think you're so smart, Joe, and then I kind of got kicked in the teeth. He just pays and then runs away,
Yeah.
and it's hard. But my point was one to just like make myself look like an idiot. But no, my point was it's hard to get it back if you don't own it. It's harder to just like, hey, you owe me money, as opposed to you're in my house or you're driving my car. You
Yeah.
have more leverage, especially in Utah or certain states,
Yeah.
than if you actually put the asset in their name. That gives them a lot of power because it's theirs, that's the cool thing about owning real estate, guys, is like
Yeah.
you own
Absolutely.
it.
Yeah.
Um, that's cool. So do you own real estate as well, or are you like 100% just note guy, like fully converted?
Just notes.
Yeah.
After, the further I've gone along, the more I'm like, you know what? Why am I trying to get to the property? That initially that was my whole approach. I was buying these non-performing notes with the intent of getting the property. And that was my
Mm.
whole approach in the beginning. And then as it kind of went on, I'm like, so why am I trying to get the property? There's just a lot more work. Then I got to do something to it. Then I got to pay taxes. Like there's things involved, and I don't want to do that if
Mhm.
I don't have to. And it's an interesting trade-off. And my wife and I debated over this for a while. And then again, same thing. The more we went on, the more she's like, no, I'm with you. Notes all the way. Forget it. We don't need the property.
Yeah.
They're more work than it needs to be. We don't get the appreciation of the property, which is the downside.
Right.
But
Hmm.
we don't have any of the headaches that go along with. I mean, again, not to say there's nothing there. There's everything's all roses and perfect all the time. Of course not. But it's far less because we're dealing with homeowners, not renters.
But you're not like me, where I just had to replace 3 water heaters this month, at
Exactly.
$500 a hit, just $1,500 is gone. Bye bye.
Yeah.
Not to mention paying for the time, the labor, and the coordination. You don't replace water heaters.
No. No. If
It's
you're
like,
your water heater's broken, you don't call the bank unless you want a loan.
right.
That's why you call the bank.
Yeah. No, I love that. I think that's super interesting. The passivity. I always say, when I was trying to get someone to give me a seller finance, like, hey, will you seller finance property so I can buy it? The
Yeah.
pitch, the line, and for those listening, it's like, hey, there's only one true passive player in real estate, and that's the lender. So I'm going to upgrade you from landlord to lender. Let me
Mhm.
buy your house. You carry the note. And that's kind of the way I explain it to get a seller to sell me on seller financing, to sell me their property.
Right.
But that's really it. Like, you're like, I don't want to be a landlord. Like, it's
Yeah.
not just a line as a sales pitch to convince somebody who doesn't understand what they're doing to give me their house. I mean, it's that's your whole philosophy is like upgrade myself from landlord to lender and
Yeah.
just own the notes. Like it's powerful.
And then so that you convince somebody to sell you a note on terms, and you say, I don't know. And then, by the way, I know a guy who will actually buy the note from you. If you decide after a year, you know what, I don't really want to continue making like receiving payments like this. I'd rather have a lump sum. Great, I'll
Mm.
buy that. Then I step in and I cash him out, and then he's now out of the picture. He's got his lump sum. I step into the role as the lender.
That's really interesting. Okay, so this is cool because I don't know a lot of people that do what you do. But yeah, because a lot of these notes, most, not the ones I buy, I like long-term notes, but
Yeah,
a lot of them have a 5-year balloon, 3-year balloon, 7 or 10 if
often, yeah.
you're lucky. So you're saying at a 5-year, you might be able to go in, you buy the note, and we don't have to go get a DSCR loan or some traditional financing. We can just go to you and you virtually become a long-term private lender.
Yeah, and at any time, if literally if
It
the
doesn't even
if
have
the
to be at the
seller,
balloon. But
yeah, if they've created that note and like 1-2 months in, they're like, actually, I'd rather have that lump sum right now. Great, there's buyers for that note, and they would buy that right away. You don't have to wait for the balloon. You don't have to wait for any kind of a trigger. It's just, I want my money now.
and so you obviously offer a discount on it. Let's say, you owe 200,000 on the note, right?
Mhm.
And so the seller, is carrying this $200,000 note, and you come in, you're going to offer them what? 150, 180, 100? Like how big of a discount do you normally offer on these notes to make it worth your while?
Well, the biggest determining factor is what the interest rate is. So
Mm.
it's there's two things really. What's the interest rate and what's the term? If it's a 30-year term and it's a 3% interest rate, we're not going to get a deal done. My
You don't
discount's going
want
to be
that.
massive, and you're not going to like it, and you'll think I'm trying to mess you over somehow. But that's just kind of how it is. Because I run a fund, and I need for that fund, I'm searching
Yeah.
for a specific yield target. So if we're looking at a really low interest note, that it's just not going to work. My number's never going to be good enough for you.
Yeah, the only people that can afford to lend at 3% for 30 years are the banks that get it for free
Yeah,
because they can do fractional lending. Go
yeah,
read The Creature from Jekyll Island if anybody's listening, and go understand fractional lending. The banks can lend 9 times. I don't know if it's like this in Canada, but in
Mhm.
America, the banks can lend 9 times the amount of money they have in their storehouse.
Yeah,
So if a
yeah,
bank has $100,000 in their safe, they can lend out 900,000. I can
yeah,
take a pretty low interest rate when I'm lending out money that doesn't exist. You
yeah.
know what I mean?
Exactly,
But for
exactly.
you and me and your investors, it's real money that actually needs a real return because it's actually exists and people have worked hard for it.
Yeah, exactly. They get a warehouse line of credit and at ridiculously low rates, 0.5% maybe, something like that, and then they're able to go out and lend it and relend it and relend it again.
Yeah. So you guys, yeah. So if it's a high interest rate though, that's where you'll be able to. You might not even have to discount it as much as
Right.
I was saying. But I'm sure you never offer face value, do you? I mean, I guess
I
if the note's
I
attractive enough,
don't.
you might. No, okay.
No, because even if the interest rate is, so my target yield for the fund is 12%. So if somebody's offering a loan where the interest rate on that's 12, I'm actually probably going to buy that at 12 and a half to myself. So I'm going to offer in just a little bit of a discount because there's always the risk that I'm taking on, first of all, just owning the note in the first place. There's also another risk where if I buy that note today, what if they pay off tomorrow or next month?
Mm-hmm.
Then if I've just paid for it and I got paid off, that was all for nothing. I got nothing in this whole deal. So I
You've
have to
lost the
build in.
transaction cost because it does cost money to do all the
Yeah,
transactions.
yeah.
Even if you buy a $20,000 note for $20,000 and they pay it off, it's not like you have $20,000 in your pocket. You got
No,
15, 18
yeah.
maybe.
Minus all the costs that went up front.
The
So
transaction, yeah.
so there's always going to be some discount in there. A higher interest rate for sure. The discount's going to be smaller, but there's going to be something.
But if you had a note for like 15 or 19%, you maybe wouldn't discount it too much. You'd just be happy to take that note.
I'd probably be pretty happy just to take that as is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. That's interesting, man. So and feel free to tell me to shut up if you have things you want
No,
to
not at
share. I'm
all.
just loving this conversation. So you started out and you started doing the seller financing to get rid of that bundle. Let's pivot it to when you started buying notes And the difference between like, hey, I own this property, I'll seller finance it, to I'm going to go buy notes. I think that's the gap. A lot of listeners are like, wait a second. Like most people understand seller financing now in the real estate world because it's, creative
Sure.
time. That's like the whole world is like, oh, creative financing, so cool now,
Yeah.
because of
Yeah.
interest rate. But what about buying notes? How does that work? And then the other question, I'll just say it and then we'll forget it maybe, but we can address it,
Sure.
is you're like, you can go find someone to buy a note. Like, where do we find guys like you, these note buyers? Like if I wanted to sell the note. But anyway, let's just first start with the first question though. Like, how did you get into buying the notes? And let's talk about the difference between that than just seller financing as the owner.
Yeah, when I got started, I went to that very first conference, 2009, and I was like, man, this is awesome. This is so cool. I love this idea. But it was really still all about creative finance and seller finance. Like that was really kind of what was being taught at the time.
Right.
And then it was during one of the classes that I took, literally it must have been 2009 or 10, where they did like an hour or 2 hours on bad debt, about buying up debt where people were not making payments. And I was like, that sounds so crazy. That sounds super risky. Why on earth would you do that? But then I started looking at it more, and you got to understand, back then pricing was ridiculous. Like you could get, 15, 20 cents on the dollar was not uncommon. Like that was pretty standard. And so,
meaning someone has a note for $100,000, you could go pay $20,000.
yeah,
Because,
it was
and the
insane.
sellers being like, well, yeah, and they're not making payments on it. Like it's not worth
Right.
anything if they don't make payments. So that's why they're willing to just sell it to you at such a large discount.
Right. But then I look at that and I say, okay, so I can buy this for $20,000, but the house, it used to be worth 150. Now it's only worth 75. But I'm like, still, that's a ton of room in there. So if I do end up taking back the property, that's fine. I'm not worried about that. So that was that beginning where I'm like, oh, I want the house. I want the house. It was a cheap, easy way to get houses. And then as it kind of progressed on, pricing kind of over time started getting a little bit more competitive, where instead of 20 cents on the dollar, now it's 30, and now it's 40, and now it's 50. And to the point where today, actually, it's hard to find them. First of all, there's just much less non-performers out there, which is kind of a good thing. It means the economy is in a pretty good spot. Or at the very least, it means that nobody's selling off the non-performers that they have.
Do you only buy non-performing notes? And by guys, listen, when he says non-performing, it means the person's not making payments on their mortgage or whatever. So do you only buy non-performing, or do you ever buy like fully performing ones?
I actually switched. So this was about a year and a half ago. We decided to open up this fund that we're running, and now we're only buying performing.
Cool.
In the fund, it's so much easier to manage. When I'm, looking at it and I have to make payments to my investors every quarter, then a non-performer, they're extremely unpredictable. They're a lot of fun and they're really cool to work with, but they're very unpredictable. So the performing just makes way more sense.
And the longer the term, the better for you then, I'm guessing. If you're getting a 12, let's say you liked 12% is what you want for your guys. So 12, 13%, so there's room for you or whatever. If that's rolling out for 20 years, like good, right? Like,
Yeah,
or do you need it? So hold on. In my brain, I'm thinking, wait. So you're a private lender virtually, where you'll take a 12% or 13% for like a 30-year loan?
Yes. So let's flip it around. So let's say somebody has done a seller finance deal and they put in their interest rate of, call it 9%. Then I would come in and for easy numbers, it's a $30,000 or $100,000 balance. I'll come in there and I'll say, okay, I'll give you, and different factors play into it, but again, just for conversation, I'll pay $75,000 for that. So now I have the right to collect $100,000 principal balance over the next 27 years, because they've made a couple of years of payments and now I'm the one that's stepping in. So because I bought that $100,000 9% interest rate balance at 75, that automatically boosts up my return. So now I'm sitting at a 12 rather than the 9 because I bought it on sale.
Gotcha. So even though the interest rate didn't change, on the paperwork, your yield
Right.
is a 12%
Yeah,
because you didn't pay 100 grand for it.
exactly. Yeah.
As opposed to if I came to you and said, "Hey, Nathan, I've got this $100,000 property. Can you just give me 100 grand at 12% interest for 30 years and just be my private long-term lender?" That doesn't really. Would you do that?
For a long, I would have to really look at it. I would prefer to buy a note that has been created by somebody else.
Why?
It's easier for me. I don't
Because
have to go through the process. I'm in that case, I'm not the one actually qualifying the borrower. Uh, where I step in as something that's already created, they've already gone through all that. So it's the laziest way to invest because somebody else already did all the hard work out front, created the note. I'm just now looking at the numbers that you created and say, yeah, that looks good. I'll give you this much. As long as
yeah.
I'm hitting my yield numbers, then that's what I'm looking for.
Well, and then the protection side, like say it's different than that is you've got this margin of 20, 30%, 50%, 20, it's 80% back in the day,
Yeah,
whatever. If things go south, your only benefit isn't just, hey, I'm getting a 12% return. You're like, I've got this margin between what it's worth and what I owe, which
yeah,
just gives you so much safety and what I read in your bio, the multiple exits
yeah,
option. Because if
yeah.
you go lend me 100 grand at 12% for 100 grand property, yeah, you're getting a good return. I'm stoked. I got a long-term private lender. That's what I'm looking for.
Sure,
Um, but you don't have any equity margin, so
exactly.
that puts you in a riskier spot, which is probably another reason why people don't do it that way.
Right. Yeah. And can you get short-term loans like that? Yeah, definitely. If you're looking for a 12-month
Yeah.
loan and at 12% and 3 points up front or something like that, all day long, you can find that all over the place. But for a 30-year note, that's gonna be tough.
But I'm interested though in this. I mean, but what if you did have the discount? What if I came to you, Nathan, and was like, "Hey, I've got this $100,000 property. It's worth 100 grand. Will
Yeah,
you give me 80 grand on it at 12% interest for 30 years?"
I
You
would
hit
give
these metrics,
75.
right?
I want at least a 25%
Okay.
equity spread in there.
Would you give me 75,000 for 30 years at 12%?
Nobody's actually ever approached me on that, but yeah, I'd certainly look at that.
I mean, I'm not like I'm just on one today. I don't know, but I'm like, dude, there's so many people. It's hard to find long-term debt. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? That's any good. And some people, in some situations, I would rather pay you maybe 12% if the numbers work, than
Sure.
go be on a balloon at 8 or 9 or 10% that could
Yeah.
balloon to who knows what down the road, and just know I'm solid for the next 30 years. Especially, I might get a better amortization because some of these DSCR loans are only amortizing for 15 or 20 years. If I
Right.
could go get a 30-year am and it's locked, I'd rather give you 12 than the DSCR note 9.
That's a good point. And as long as you're doing it in an entity, any kind of a company entity, then
Sure.
yes, then that's definitely doable. And I say that because if it's in a personal name, somebody's regular name, there's way more laws surrounding that, lending to natural people versus lending to corporations, companies. That's a different set of guidelines.
Who are these laws protecting? Because I've heard that a lot of it. Because for me, I'm like, great. I'd rather have the loan be in an LLC's name instead of my name because now I don't
Yeah.
have debt against my personal name. That's awesome for me. So I like that they do that. But why do the lenders do that? What is the logic behind that?
So it goes back to the crash, 2008, 2009, and in 2010, 11, they started creating these whatever legislation trying to protect consumers. The argument was that during the run up before the crash, uh, it, either predatory lending or just irresponsible lending. I don't
Yeah.
know, depending on what side of the coin you're on that one.
Definitely both was happening.
Yeah, but they were giving out loans like it was candy,
Yeah.
and so there was an effort to stop that. So the law that was passed is called Dodd-Frank, and part of Dodd-Frank's created the CFPB, the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. I probably didn't come out of that, but they're a big part of that today. Um, but they go through and for example, as really at the base of it, it's just making sure that the borrower has the ability to repay. And so you're not
Yeah.
going after somebody and saying, hey, I'll give you all this money. Their debt to income ratio is like 60% or some stupid thing like that. Or there's no way that they can actually afford that loan, but they'll take it because they're desperate. So that's the reasoning behind it and behind all the laws.
Gotcha.
In my opinion, I think they went a little bit overboard, and we're in the process of trying to scale that back a little bit and make it a little bit more feasible for
Yeah.
people to lend to natural people. But that's in process.
That's interesting. Is there any states you don't lend in? Do you lend in New York?
I don't.
Yeah, no one lends in New York.
That whole New England area, because I bought 2 notes in New York years ago as kind of an experiment. They were already in foreclosure, so I'm like, that's fine. They'll, I'll just finish out the foreclosure. We'll sell the property. It'll be great. 2 years later,
I was going to say 2 years.
Unbelievable. Then it's still going on. I'm like, okay, that's why we don't buy in New York. Okay, mental note, check. Don't do that again.
That's awesome. Dude, this is super cool. So you start going and buying notes, you buy them at a discount, you've got equity in there because you bought a discount. Your yield, goes up way more than the actual interest rate on the note because you bought it for less.
Right.
And then you're in this really good position. Now you're using investor money for a lot of this. It sounds like now you just kind of run a investment firm that just, hey, go buy me stuff and get me an extra turn, Nathan. They give you your money. Give them their.
Yeah, it's a 506c fund. It's for accredited investors. They put their money in. A lot of IRA money goes in there, and then it's just grow it without having to think about it. You get your quarterly distribution. You can reinvest that if you want, have it compound. It's the easiest way that you're going to invest, in my opinion.
So where are you making money on that then? So they bring in money and say, hey, Nathan, I've got $100,000 in this IRA. Will you go invest it and give me a blank return? Where do you make money running your firm?
So I get the spread. So we pay our investors 8%, and then it sounds like a 4% spread. It's not actually when you do the math. We're buying at a 12% yield. So it sounds like 4%. It's actually closer to 2%. But we're making that spread. That's our payment.
Who pays for transaction costs?
No transaction costs. We don't do that.
No. So, but when you're buying though, there is, right? When you go buy a note, you got to pay to do due diligence. You got to pay to close it, or you to close it. I mean, I guess
for closing, this is where it gets interesting. We're comparing to real estate. So there's due diligence up front. It costs a few $100s. I'm checking title. I'm checking the actual property, making sure the value is there. That's really, as far as expenses go on the buy side, that's it. There's no title company. We're not exchanging title in most cases, unless we're doing like a lease option contract or something. But in most cases, we're not exchanging title, so it doesn't go through a title company. So there's no cost there.
So what is the process of exchanging the note then? Like, who does that go through to make sure it's vetted and correct?
That's where it gets interesting. Yeah, that my very first transaction, it's like I'm biting my nails thinking, oh, this better work because this is what I was told how it goes. So this better work. This business, more than anything I know, is so much about relationships. So you got a note for sale. I say, yes, I'll buy it. We have a sales agreement. I send you money, and then you send me all the documents, all the collateral documents to the loan. That's it. So the transfer itself is an assignment of mortgage and then a launch. And it's those 2 documents along with the whole stack of docs documenting the mortgage itself and the note and the terms and all those.
Do you file that with the county?
Then you file that assignment of mortgage that gets recorded at the county. And then as of record, now I'm the one collecting on that mortgage.
So that's it. You just do an assignment of mortgage, file it at the county for $50 or $10 or whatever.
That's it.
And that's your transaction cost.
That's it. So that's for us, that's built in. We don't charge extra to the investor because there's no point.
Right. So there's virtually no transaction cost.
Yeah.
It's not like you're paying an agent and a lender and a title company.
No, but that's where the relationship comes in. You better know who your seller is. You better know who your buyer is and know them well enough that you're willing to just send money. I'm going to send you money. You're going to send me the stuff, right? Right.
Oh, you don't even use an escrow company or anything in between.
You can. Sometimes, I mean, if you're doing like a really big deal, maybe that's something you want to do. But for the most part, no, there's no escrow. There's no anything. You send the money, I'll send you the docs.
Do they sign first, or who pay? Do you pay before they sign, or do they sign before you pay?
Well, we've got a purchase and sale agreement. That's the signing. And then, okay, great. Sounds good. Here's the stuff.
So you do
So
a
I
purchase
have, for
sale agreement with
example,
the seller saying, hey, you promise you'll sell me this. Yep,
yeah,
these are the terms. I'll sell it to you. You pay them the full 75% of the note or
the whole
whatever,
thing.
and then they sign the form actually signing the note over.
They might send, the way that I do it is I have them sign the paper and then send me a copy of it. But they can't actually send me the original document, because then what if I go ahead and just record that and not give you the money? So it's very much a trust business, and that's, I kind of like that. It's a small enough group of people. We know each other, and if you do something stupid, everybody's going to know about it in a minute.
So you're buying from institutions and other holders, not as much as going to random one-off, like me. Let's say I'm just some Joe Schmo that has a seller finance note, and I'm like, hey, will you buy this, Nathan? You're not really doing that because you don't know me from Adam. You're buying from other people that hold a bunch of notes.
Mostly, yes. I do get approached with some of those single deals, and we'll talk, and we'll see if hopefully we can come together and I can decide whether or not I trust you and we're going to be able to make a deal. But it's done all the time. So it's an interesting.
Yeah. But to do it cleaner for listeners, like you could just do it through an escrow company where you give all the docs to the escrow company, the money goes to the escrow company, just like a normal closing, and pay them, $1,000 or whatever, $500, and then call it good.
Yeah, you could.
If you just
Absolutely.
wanted to be careful. Like if you didn't know the seller, if you were just like more concerned about the seller.
But I'll tell you, like if it's a hedge fund or something, and you say, well, let's do this through escrow, they're going to be like, what? Why?
Yeah. But I'm just saying, if some listeners, like a one-off person finds a one-off note and they just want to go buy try this stuff low key, they can still do it safely without having to know or trust the seller if they're just buying these random one-off.
Yeah, definitely. You can for sure. But there's making sure the escrow company understands what you're doing and know there's no exchange of titles. So don't run, all the title, everything that you normally do, because we're not doing that. We're just exchanging the right to receive on this mortgage.
Yeah, and talking about transaction costs, I'll just throw this out there because I was just going through it. I'm buying this one house subject to right now, and it's super clean. It's a person I know. It's like the easiest thing in the world. I have all the docs. I send it over to the title company. I'm like, let's just, have you guys file the paperwork. You put title in my name. We'll get some title insurance on it.
Yeah.
And then we're doing closing, and they had like an $800 paperwork fee, a $2,000 escrow fee, because it was a creative finance, and they always just charge extra $2,000 for that. Yeah. And then they charge us two notary fees because we both were signing with the notary. I'm like, wait a second. Like, first of all, I can get a notary for free. I don't need to pay $250 in notary fees. I don't need to pay $800. And this is all on top of the actual title insurance amount, which was like $1,200 for the title insurance. It is what it is. That's pretty typical. But this other $2,000 fee plus an $800 fee plus a $250. I told them to kick rocks, and I'm like, I'm just going to do it myself. Yeah. I don't even need title insurance because the home was just bought in like an FHA loan. Like they already did all that. I know it's clean title.
Right.
I'm just going to go file it myself and get it to a quit claim deed or a warranty deed on my own and just kick the whole title company out. Like I couldn't believe how many fees they threw into that transaction when I provided all the paperwork. The seller is the cleanest, easiest thing in the world for them. And they refused to drop the fees, and they fired me, and I fired them, and I was just like,
done. No, and you don't need that. That's unnecessary.
Yeah, I mean, and that was on top of the normal, title insurance fees and paperwork fees. Like this was all excess of that. I just couldn't believe it. And I was like, I'm not paying $2,000 for absolutely nothing.
No, exactly. Yeah, and there's no point.
So that's super cool, man. So you guys do these. Man, we might need to do a part 2, man. I feel like I could talk to you forever about this stuff. If people do want to learn more, or they want to like sell you a note or get you to start doing long-term financing like I want you to do for me, where I'm like, hey, you just lend me 75% of the value of the home at 12% interest, but amortize it for 30 or 40 years. I'm stoked. So these 15-year amortizations the DSCR lenders are doing. Yeah. Anyway, if people want to go to you and follow you, do business with you, where is that? How do they do that?
Best thing to do is go to the website, earnestinvesting.com. And so we didn't really talk about this, but I'll just mention it. So on there, you'll learn a little bit more about notes. There's my contact information, all that. There's a link on there. Also, I run an annual conference. You mentioned in the intro. And that's actually coming up May 2nd and 3rd. So it's all about notes, no pitching. There's nobody's going to say, run to the back of the room. It's not an allowed thing to say.
Yeah.
But it's just a place to come and network and learn more about notes and how it works.
Where's that at?
It's in Nashville.
Cool.
Which is
in Nashville in May.
Super fun. Yeah. May 2nd and 3rd in Nashville.
That's cool. And so if people go to Ernest, what was the website?
Ernest Investing.
ErnestInvesting.com.
Yeah. And then the conference.
Go on.
Sorry. And then the conference is Diversified Mortgage Expo. And there's a link there on that website. But if you want to just go to the Diversified Mortgage Expo site, you can do that as well.
Cool. Diversified Mortgage Expo. Yeah, you can go to that website. You can check that out. ErnestInvesting.com. Check that out. And do you do any of this in Canada or just in the US?
All US.
All US. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Cool. And it sounds like mostly like say those southern eastern states, not really New England area, but not a ton of like California or Utah or Idaho or any of that.
I've had notes in Arizona and New Mexico and Colorado, Nevada, never in Utah. I almost bought one in Montana. Somebody outbid me on that one, but the vast majority, eastern half of the country.
Cool. Man, I feel like we barely scratched the surface of this, but thanks for letting me just jab you with all my questions and thoughts.
No, not at all. Anytime.
I think note buying is really interesting. I'm going to give you a little bit of a blast though here to kind of push back a little bit, right? Because it's like, cool, it's passive. There's there's less headaches, there's different kind of headaches. You know, you can have all this leverage, but you don't own the asset. And at the end of the day, the note dries up. And you're back at square one. You're not getting the tax write-offs. You're not getting the appreciation. You own nothing at the end of the 10, 15, 20, 30 years. And so you're still in the hamster wheel. Okay, that's my hard push.
No, for sure.
What's your thoughts on that?
No, you're not wrong. That's exactly how it is. And so one of the interesting things when you're buying a note, a lot of the time it's kind of the standard term is 30 years. So if I'm looking at buying a 30-year term note, the chances of that going all 30 years are very slim. Most people, they're going to move, they're going to refinance because they're at 9% with me and all of a sudden the bank's down back at 4 or 5%. And I actually push them to go back and refinance. So I'll say, look, here's your amortization chart at 9% where you are right now. Here's what the bank's offering at 4 or 5%. Look how much money you could save just by doing that. And the reason I do that is because if I get paid off early, my return skyrockets. The faster I get paid off,
they're paying off $100,000 note that you only owed $75,000 on.
Right.
So you're getting $100,000 that you paid $75,000 for. You're like, great.
So the faster I can get paid off, the better. So again, that the chances of them going all 3 years are pretty slim. As that money comes back out, you're right. Then I got to go back out and deploy it somewhere else. But that's for me. And everybody's different, but I've decided that's worth it for me. I don't want to have to deal with the property. I would rather use my time buying more notes as they pay off.
And it makes me just think of that term, the velocity of money. You're like, I'm not sitting there building a slow empire over 45 years. I'm moving fast money. It's moving, and you've got the system in place to do it in the contacts. So it's like, it's not like a struggle for you to do. And then you can really take advantage of the velocity of money.
Yeah, I've got more deals than I can handle. My bottleneck is available capital. So that's why we put together this fund. So we can, as money comes in, it's just going straight back out the door, which is great. That's fantastic. But we can always use more money.
Cool. So if people want to invest with you, they want to sell a note, they can hit you up, ErnestInvesting.com. Check out the expo. Diversified Mortgage Expo. That sounds super cool. Man, I wish I didn't have a hard stop in 5 minutes, but I do got to go. So I'm going to bust through our last 4 questions real quick, but let's have you back on. I would love to pick your brain some more. This is super exciting.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. Question number 1 of our final 4 is, if you could send a text message to the whole world, everybody gets your text message from Nathan Turner, what's it going to say?
Just keep going. Whatever it is you're dealing with, just keep going.
Just keep going. All right. Book or podcast recommendation besides anything we're associated with?
Oh, one that I listen to, a podcast that I listen to that I find very valuable is called The Art of Manliness. And it's
Mm.
he used to have a bunch of a website with videos and things, and now he does it as a podcast. I find that one extremely valuable. I really like it. That's a
Yeah,
good.
that's cool. I haven't heard that one on here before, but I'm familiar with the podcast.
Yeah,
I think it used to be a blog back in the day.
I think it was a
Uh,
blog. Yeah, and then
yeah,
it's become a podcast. But it's
love it.
great. It's a good one.
The art of manliness. All right. Question number 3. What's the most expensive or interesting mistake that you've made in real estate investing?
um, gosh, I've made a bunch of mistakes. I think I'll share a near mistake where I've made a lot of mistakes, but this one kind of sticks out in my brain for whatever reason. So we'll go with this one. So years ago, I was looking at buying a note on a property, and from what I could tell online, I was looking at property value online. There was a giant spread in there, so there's tons of equity. It was underwater, so they owed way more than the house was even worth. But the price that they were offering was so low that I was like, "Oh, this is a no-brainer. Perfect.
Yeah.
This would be a great deal." And I almost skipped a step. I almost didn't have somebody go out and look at the property, which is a normal part of what I do, just to give me their opinion of the value. But because there's such a big spread, I'm like, there's no point. There's such a giant spread in here. It could be worth $20,000 less and it's still fine. But I was like, nah, I'll do it just so I have it in the file, just so I can get it in there and just say that I did it. And so I did. I sent somebody out there to go to look at the property. They came back and it was land. And the house had been demolished. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I did that. Because now all of a sudden it was worth about what I was going to pay for that note. So saved my butt on that one. But that was a close one.
You know what's wild with that? I had the opposite happen.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
buying from a wholesaler. I'm thinking I'm buying just some land. And I'm like, cool, I'm going to rent the land out. Someone's going to put an RV or mobile home on it. All good. I buy it. There's a house on it. It's a mobile home, but there's already a property there
Yeah.
that the wholesaler didn't even know, because they were just wholesaling, burning and churning. Like, no one's
Yeah.
doing due diligence. Honestly, no one checked the tax IDs of what lots they were selling, so the seller didn't even know what he was selling. It was just
Too funny.
huge mess.
Yeah.
I knew what I was buying as far as the tax IDs, the locations. I knew I wasn't getting this one part of it for some reason, but it was kind of weird. But I ended up with this house on a mobile home, but it was a house on the property. And so I was able to rent it out for 3 times, what I and
Oh,
and there's this whole lawsuit. They're like, the seller is like, what, the person who thought they had bought that property 3 years ago, but they'd actually just bought the driveway. They
okay.
hadn't bought the whole parcel. They just bought the driveway. I bought everything except the driveway. And I knew I wasn't getting the driveway. I was like, oh, I had a new driveway in the back. That's weird. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it was out of state and I didn't have anybody to put eyes on it. So I ended up with this whole thing, and we'll see what happens with it. I don't know. But
Oh, that's funny.
the court said if no one does anything over like 2 years, then the lawsuit will drop, and it's coming up like this in the next month or two. It should be 2 years, and no one's actually
there
filed,
you
because
go.
they don't have any ground to stand on, because
No.
the person who bought it screwed up because they bought just the driveway instead of the whole
Yeah.
parcel. So that's just one piece I'd say to, similar to you, go put physical eyes on it, but go to the actual tax map and see
Yeah.
if you're actually buying what you think you're buying.
Yeah.
And because I had to make them during closing, I had to have them throw in 2 or 3 more tax IDs, because this whole lot was split up into like 5 units for some reason.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And no one knew what was
Too
going on.
funny.
But luckily that was part of my process, like you said, where I just, hey, I'm going to check the tax ID and make sure the parcel's correct. And it's like, oh, they're missing a piece. Okay, we'll throw those in.
Yeah.
And it saved my butt. If they had done that, they would have been fine. But anyway, total crazy
That's
situation.
funny.
You can end up without a house or end up with an extra one. So
Yeah.
be careful out there, guys.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, last one, man. What's a one word or short phrase to encapsulate why you love real estate investing or note buying?
Oh, passive income.
Passive income, baby.
That's what it's all about.
Nathan, this was a treat. I don't know. You brought me the energy today. You got me excited. I loved this. I definitely want to have you back on for more, because I feel like we've just scratched the surface of what you're doing.
Yeah.
But I'm excited to go check out your website and learn more about the note buying, because I think it actually is the solution the answer to what a lot of people are looking for with investing, and they just don't know it exists. So
Yeah,
this is
definitely.
awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Thanks for being on the show. I'm excited to have you back sometime.
Yeah, pleasure. You bet. Anytime.
Awesome. This is Joe Jensen signing off for the Real Estate Investing School podcast, reminding you to go make it happen.